What's up guys, this is Preheat, World First Raider in Complexity Limit and Wowhead Guide Writer, and today we're going to be talking about Frost Mage. So I know that there's been a lot of hype about fire. In fact, I even just put out a video just the other day about it. But there are actually more than one good spec in Shadowlands for mages. Fire and Frost are both so good that I don't recommend just going all in on one or the other. But it does cause a few complications. We'll talk about more of that in just a little bit. But anyways, Frost is very strong in Shadowlands. I think we're going to see a lot of it in Castle Nathria, especially on fights with cleave. And today we're going to talk about it as a spec. We're also going to talk about which covenant you should choose, which soulbinds you should go for, the conduits you should use, the legendaries you should craft first, and of course, how to play. Okay, so new might not be the best word for a lot of these abilities since a lot of them are returning. But Mage does have a lot of new abilities. So first off, we're going to get Alter Time back. That is the version from Warlords of Draenor that's just your health and position, but it's a very strong ability. Mirror Image is being added back as a defensive cooldown. We now have a new talent called Focus Magic that takes the place of Mirror Image in our talent tree. Icy Veins is now off the global cooldown. Hallelujah for that. Winter's Chill lasts longer and affects the next 2 spells that hit the target instead of just the 1, like it did in Battle for Azeroth. Rune of Power has also been changed to 1 charge, but it also is automatically dropped on the ground whenever you pop your Icy Veins. In addition to that, Arcane Explosion and Fire Blast are now baseline for all the mage specs. Okay, so when it comes to covenants, Venthyr is the best covenant for Frost mages, generally speaking. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to go Venthyr, okay? A lot of you probably aren't rating at a super high end, right? You can just choose whatever covenant you want. I want to stress that, but if you want to go for the best covenant for Frost mages, it's going to be Venthyr. The Venthyr ability, Mirrors of Torment, grants Frost mages a flurry every time that it procs, which makes it extremely strong. That's basically 3 free flurries that we get with the Venthyr ability. In single target, Venthyr is absolutely dominant, and Night Fae is basically dead last. I mentioned Night Fae because, I know a lot of mages are probably going Night Fae since they want to play fire with Night Fae. It's great for fire. So this is one of those situations where I mentioned before, it gets a little complicated. So yeah, in single target, Venthyr is basically 7% ahead of Night Fae. Now that does change in AoE. So once you have 4 more targets, then Frost mages actually begin to use their shifting power, and then it ends up actually kind of catching up. And in 5 targets, it actually surpasses Venthyr in terms of what sims say. But yeah, in single target, the main reason why it's so far behind is because the Night Fae ability shifting power is so bad for Frost that in single target, you don't even use it, right? So you heard that right. The Night Fae Covenant ability, the same one that was just nerfed the other day, is so bad in single target for Frost that you don't even press the button. Anyways, as targets are added, the Night Fae ability kind of catches up, ends up being the best at 5 targets. Also, Necrolord gains a little bit of strength as well as you add more targets in. So if you want to play Fire and Frost, this makes your choice very complicated because you aren't sure, if you want to go Night Fae or Venthyr because you aren't sure if you want to go Fire or Frost. Me personally, I'm going to be leveling 2 mages to get around this, but it is a very sticky situation. So Necrolord and Kyrian are also decent options as well. I want to talk about the other covenants too, but just keep in mind that as you add more targets, Necrolord kind of keeps up while Kyrian falls behind. In terms of the covenant ability for Venthyr, Door of Shadows is the signature ability. Whenever you cast Door of Shadows, it lets you teleport 35 yards, roughly 2 blinks in distance. Mages already have a lot of movement speed abilities, so this isn't make or break, but it's definitely welcome. When it comes to Soulbinds, Nagia and Theotar are the best options. Nagia's Thrill Seeker basically gives you a haste buff a little over a minute into the fight, whereas Theotar's ability gives you an umbrella where whenever you stand under the shade of that umbrella, you gain a mastery buff. With Theotar, you can also choose between 2 different options that buff your Door of Shadows. One gives it a second charge and increased cooldown, and the other gives it a root and snare break, which is pretty cool. Neither of those 2 soulbinds are make or break. Neither of them give you 2 potency conduits for Mythic Week, and they're also close enough for it just to be up to your own preference. So when it comes to other covenants, as I mentioned before, Necrolord, Kyrian, and Night Fae are substantially behind Venthyr when it comes to single target for Frost. But as more targets are added, that gap closes, except for Kyrian. Necrolord is carried by Imni's Lead by Example Soulbind, which is a passive stat buff, and Night Fae actually gets to press shifting power at 4 more targets. In Mythic Plus, AoE is king. Night Fae performs well there, but Venthyr is better for focusing targets that need to die. Because of this, if you are focused just on raiding and you want to just choose one spec, and Frost is the spec that you choose, I definitely recommend that you go Venthyr. Okay, on to Conduits. The first one up is Icy Propulsion. Icy Propulsion is a pretty strong conduit. It gives your Icy Veins cooldown reduction whenever you crit during your Icy Veins. Ice Bite is going to be the single target option. It basically just buffs the damage of your Ice Lance. And Unrelenting Cold is going to be the one that buffs Frozen Orb. I recommend always using Icy Propulsion and swapping Ice Bite or Unrelenting Cold depending on what you want to do. Flow Time is also a very strong option since it affects Shimmer, and it helps to kind of counteract the nerf that Shimmer got with those 5 additional seconds of cooldown in Shadowlands. And Cryo Freeze basically brings back Ice Block healing that was there in a glyph form way back in the day. But yeah, Frost Mages having an ability that just gives them a big heal in combat is awesome. Legendaries. With Legendaries, Frost has even more hard choices to make. So the best AoE legendary and the best single target legendary are in direct opposition to each other. Slick Ice is going to be our best single target legendary. It basically buffs Frostbolt when it comes to its cast speed and its damage while you have Icy Veins up. Whereas Glacial Fragments makes Ice Lance have a 20% chance to explode your Ice Lances on impact. And that chance goes up to 100% if the target is currently in a blizzard. Glacial Fragments is going to be the ringer choice for AoE. It's absolutely dominant in AoE, whereas Slick Ice is absolutely dominant in single target, but not great for AoE at all. Also, I should mention that Glacial Fragments is also terrible in single target, right? So basically, you have an option that is great in single target, terrible in AoE, or you have the option of great in AoE, terrible in single target with Glacial Fragments. Time Warp is another fun legendary that's kind of an in-between option. It performs well in single target, but it does have some issues. So obviously, someone else needs to be providing Bloodlust for your group if you're using this legendary, right? You need to also be able to use your own Time Warp whenever you feel like it. So that means that you probably need to lust on the pull. Now, this is obviously going to cause some trouble because if your raid leader is calling for you to lust and you're sitting there looking at the other mages and the shamans saying, you do it, man, you, right? This is probably going to cause some drama in your group. But otherwise, it's a pretty decent legendary. So for talents, we just want to buff Ice Lance damage as much as possible. That's all we care about. It's just Ice Lance damage. So we're going to go with Lonely Winter as our first talent, Shimmer, Rune of Power. Now there is an option here to choose Focus Magic if you have another Frost Mage also choosing Focus Magic and you're trading it with each other. Beyond that, we also have Chain Reaction. On this row, we have kind of a choice between Freezing Rain and Splitting Ice. It kind of depends on what you're looking for. Splitting Ice is going to be better in single target. It's also better if you need to cleave 2 targets, whereas Freezing Rain is going to be the better option if you kind of just want to funnel into one target and really give that one target as much damage as possible. And then on the last row, we're going to choose Thermal Void. Okay, so how do you play Frost Mage? In my opinion, Frost Mage is one of the easiest specs to play in all of World of Warcraft. The playstyle is extremely simple. Basically, you cast Frostbolts until you see procs light up, and then you use them. By default, Ice Lance does terrible damage, but if the target is frozen, then it shatters, dealing more damage. So Fingers of Frost is the first damage proc. It makes Ice Lance act as if the target was frozen. The other is going to be Brain Freeze, which makes your next flurry instant cast and cause Winter's Chill. Winter's Chill is a debuff that has 2 stacks. It makes your next 2 direct spells against the target act as if the target was frozen. Basically, both of these buffs do the same thing, except for Flurry does it twice. But yeah, they both just buff your Ice Lance. Because both procs are triggered by Frostbolt, sometimes you're going to have a situation where both procs happen at the same time. Generally speaking, when this happens, you should spin your Fingers of Frost first with Ice Lance and then use your Flurry afterwards. Now, sometimes it's going to be impossible not to munch procs because of this, and I don't want you to get too hung up on munching procs. I will tell you kind of how you should use your logic there to figure out which spell to cast, but just know that every Frost Mage is going to be munching procs. There's just really no way around it. The important thing is that you try to munch as few brain freezes as possible. That's the more important of the two. Makes sense so far? Okay, a bit more about procs. So try to never start a Frostbolt cast if you have a Flurry and the Fingers of Frost buff up at the same time. Always use your Fingers of Frost procs first before you start casting a Frostbolt. Sometimes, though, it's going to be unavoidable to munch procs because you're going to be casting a Frostbolt after you've cleared all your Fingers of Frost, and then suddenly you get a Fingers of Frost proc, right? So in this situation, what you're going to want to do is continue casting that Frostbolt, don't interrupt it, continue casting it, and then afterwards cast Flurry and then use Ice Lance twice. We do this to avoid munching flurry procs, since that is the more important of the two. So before Shadowlands, it was recommended to shatter frostbolts by casting them into flurry, but with the new Winter's Chill, it is now less important. In single target, it is still worthwhile to cast Frostbolt into your flurry to make your Frostbolt crit, but it's a very minor gain, and it's only really worth it if you don't munch procs because of it. I only really recommend doing this in single target or when your Frozen Orb isn't up, right? So you don't get those Ice Lance Fingers of Frost procs while you're currently casting. Also avoid doing this if you only have a couple seconds left of something like Rune of Power or another damage amp, because most of our damage comes from Ice Lance, right? So you don't want to have your Ice Lance get delayed and then pushed outside of that damage window because you were too busy casting a Frostbolt. Your cooldown, Icy Veins, doesn't really change anything except for making your cast faster, but with Thermal Void, we can extend it with every Ice Lance we shatter. Let's talk about the opener. So on the pull, you're going to want to precast Frostbolt, pop Icy Veins, and then use Frozen Orb. Now keep in mind, Icy Veins is no longer on the GCD, so don't sit around waiting for it to finish. This isn't BFA anymore, okay? Once Frozen Orb makes contact with your target, it's going to give you a Fingers of Frost. After that, you want to use that Fingers of Frost. You want to use any procs you got from the first Frostbolt that you cast, and then you're going to want to cast Mirrors of Torment or Radiant Spark. Now, in some cases, depending on how fast the target procs it, holding onto that first mirror after your Frozen Orb fades is worth it. After that, just continue with your normal rotation, using Frostbolts to get procs, and then using those procs. If you're Necrolord, also cast Deathborn before your first Frostbolt. If you aren't sure what to do, remember your ABCs. Always be casting. Even if you're casting just an Ice Lance that won't even shatter, that's still damage that you're getting instead of just sitting there idly. If you aren't used to it, it might seem like a lot to take in with Frost Mage at first, but remember that practice makes perfect. If you want to ask me questions, remember that I stream most weekdays on Twitch, so you can find me there. Alright guys, thanks for watching the video. If this guide was helpful, then please like it, and if you want to see more of my content, then subscribe and then ring that notification bell so that you'll be notified as I produce more videos, and we'll see ya in Shadowlands.